Every year, roughly 2,000 people drive into these 7 Appalachian towns. According to missing persons databases, only about 400 ever file a change of address. The other 1,600, well, that's where things get interesting. And why local police have a very specific protocol they won't discuss publicly. Deep in the heart of Appalachia, there's something unsettling about the silence, where bustling mining towns once echoed with the sounds of progress, now only wind whispers through empty foundations and rusted machinery. Over 60 mining communities sprang up in the New River Gorge alone, each one a testament to American ambition and the relentless hunger for coal. The transformation happened fast, really fast. When the railroad finally snaked its way through these mountains in the 1870s, everything changed overnight. Towns that didn't exist on Monday had hundreds of residents by Friday. Coal companies moved in like modern-day gold rushers, except their treasure lay buried beneath tons of Appalachian rock. And these weren't just random settlements thrown together with hope and lumber. Companies built entire civilizations around coal seams. They constructed stores, schools, churches, and hospitals. Some towns even had their own currency company script that kept workers tied to the mines whether they liked it or not. Makes sense, right? Why let your workforce spend money anywhere else when you can control every dollar they earn? The boom years stretched for decades. Coal powered America's industrial revolution, and Appalachian communities supplied the fuel. Families poured in from across the region, drawn by steady work and the promise of prosperity. Italian immigrants worked alongside local mountain families. African American miners came north seeking better opportunities than sharecropping offered. These towns became melting pots of culture, united by the dangerous work that lay thousands of feet underground. But here's where things get interesting and a little spooky. When the coal ran out or became too expensive to extract, companies didn't just downsize. They vanished, literally packed up and left entire communities to fend for themselves. Workers who'd spent decades building these places suddenly found themselves in ghost towns practically overnight. Well, that's when nature decided to reclaim what humans had borrowed. Vines crept over company houses, trees pushed through school floors, root systems wrapped around mining equipment like nature's own revenge plot. The forest didn't just take back these towns, it swallowed them whole. Today, finding these abandoned communities requires serious detective work. Some sites hide so deep in hollows and mountainsides that GPS can't help you. Others lurk behind barriers of thorns and fallen trees that seem almost intentionally placed to keep visitors away. And the weird part is, many of these locations don't appear on modern maps anymore. They've been erased from official records as if they never existed. Local hikers occasionally stumble across foundations, rusted machinery, or cemetery stones, marking lives that once thrived in these forgotten places. But even experienced explorers struggle to locate specific towns. The wilderness has become so thick that what took 10 minutes to walk in 1940 might require hours of bushwhacking today. Then, there are the stories. Locals whisper about towns that seem to shift locations, explorers who enter the woods looking for historical sites and emerge days later with no memory of where they've been. Old-timers claim certain places just don't want to be found. Whether you believe in supernatural explanations or prefer practical ones about dangerous terrain and disorienting forest conditions, the result remains the same. These towns resist rediscovery. The most haunting aspect isn't the empty buildings or rusted equipment, it's how completely these communities have been forgotten. Places where thousands of people lived, worked, loved, and died have become nothing more than whispered names and fading photographs in historical societies. But some of these ghost towns still beckon to those brave enough to seek them out. Places like Kmore, where over 1,300 concrete steps lead down into a past that refuses to stay buried. Deep in the West Virginia wilderness, a concrete staircase descends into what feels like another world. The Kmore Trail isn't your typical hiking path. It's 821 steps carved into a mountainside, leading down to one of Appalachia's most haunting ghost towns. But here's the thing that gets people talking. Some folks who make this journey don't make it back up. Kmore wasn't just any coal town when it opened in 1899. This place was massive. We're talking about a community that housed over 200 families at its peak, complete with company stores, schools, and even a movie theater. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway needed coal, and Kmore delivered it by the trainload. Workers poured in from across Appalachia, drawn by steady wages and the promise of a better life underground. Well, better is relative when you're talking about coal mining in 1900. The work was brutal, dangerous, and the company controlled everything. Your house, your food, your debt, all of it belonged to the mine bosses. But people stayed because jobs were scarce, and Kmore kept growing. Then, there's the staircase itself. Those 821 steps weren't built for tourists taking Instagram photos. They were the daily commute for hundreds of miners who had to climb up and down this mountain just to get to work. Makes your morning coffee run seem pretty easy, right? These workers would descend before dawn and climb back up after dark, their headlamps creating an eerie procession through the forest. The town thrived for decades, but like most coal communities, Kmore's fate was tied to market demands. By the 1950s, cheaper coal sources and changing technology made the operation unprofitable. The company pulled out, families packed up, and within a few years, nature started reclaiming everything. But here's where things get weird. Local search and rescue teams report an unusual number of missing persons cases connected to Kmore. Experienced hikers go down those steps and simply vanish. Their cars remain in the parking area, their gear is sometimes found scattered along the trail, but the people? Gone. The official explanation points to the dangerous terrain. Old mine shafts dot the landscape, hidden by decades of vegetation growth. A wrong step could send someone tumbling into an abandoned tunnel system that stretches for miles underground. The forest is dense, cell service is non-existent, and if you get turned around down there, finding your way out becomes nearly impossible. Park rangers have a different theory. They've mapped most of the obvious hazards, but they keep finding new openings in the ground. The mountain is essentially Swiss cheese, honeycombed with tunnels that were never properly sealed. Some of these shafts drop straight down for hundreds of feet, and the weird part is what visitors report before they go missing. Multiple witnesses describe hearing voices calling from deeper in the ruins or seeing lights moving through the abandoned buildings at dusk. One hiker's journal, found weeks after he disappeared, contained increasingly frantic entries about workers who won't stop digging and the sound of pickaxes at midnight. The National Park Service maintains the trail and posts warning signs, but they can't watch everyone. Every year, a few more names get added to the missing persons list. Local guides refuse to take groups down after 3 p.m., claiming the mountain changes as darkness approaches. Whether you believe in supernatural explanations or stick to the practical dangers, one thing remains clear. Kmore has a way of keeping visitors longer than they planned, sometimes permanently. Speaking of towns that refuse to let go of their secrets, there's another ghost town deeper in these mountains where Henry Ford himself once invested millions. But that's a story that involves even stranger disappearances. Deep in the West Virginia wilderness, where most people wouldn't dare venture even with GPS, sits the skeletal remains of what was once an industrial powerhouse. Nuttleburg wasn't your typical coal town. This place had serious backing from one of America's richest men, Henry Ford himself. Ford needed coal for his steel mills, and he needed lots of it. When he looked at maps in the early 1900s, Nuttallburg's location made perfect sense. The coal seams ran thick and deep. The New River provided transportation. Most importantly, the remote setting meant Ford could operate without curious eyes watching his every move. Privacy was worth its weight in coal back then. But here's where things get interesting. Ford didn't just throw money at random holes in the ground. He invested in cutting-edge mining equipment that most towns could only dream about. Massive conveyor systems snaked down the mountainside like mechanical dragons. Rail lines curved through impossible terrain. The engineering was so advanced that even today, experts study the rusted remains to understand how they pulled it off. Workers flooded in from across Appalachia, drawn by wages that seemed too good to be true. Well, they weren't too good to be true, at least not at first. Ford paid well because he demanded results. The coal had to flow constantly to feed his hungry factories up north. Men worked brutal shifts, but their families ate well and lived in company houses that beat most alternatives in the region. Then, there's the isolation factor that made Nuttallburg truly unique among ghost towns. Other mining communities had some connection to the outside world. Nuttallburg felt like another planet. Getting there required determination, luck, and probably a decent pair of boots. This remoteness protected the town during its heyday, but it also sealed its doom when the coal ran thin. The weird part is how quickly everything collapsed. One day, trains loaded with coal rumbled through the valley every few hours. The next, silence. Ford's company pulled out almost overnight in the 1950s, leaving behind millions of dollars worth of machinery. Apparently, even Henry Ford couldn't make the numbers work when the easy coal disappeared. Walking through Nuttallburg today feels like stumbling onto an alien archaeological site. Massive gear wheels rust where they stopped decades ago. Conveyor belts stretch across valleys, leading nowhere. Rail lines vanish into thick forest, swallowed by vines and saplings that have grown into full trees. Nature doesn't just reclaim this place, it seems to actively hide it. Local rangers now protect the site, which sounds official until you realize how few people actually make the trek out there. The trails are rough, the weather changes fast, cell phone service, forget about it. Even experienced hikers think twice before venturing to Nuttallburg alone. What makes the place truly unsettling isn't the rusted machinery or crumbling foundations, it's the scale of abandonment. This wasn't a small operation that fizzled out. This was industrial infrastructure that cost millions, built to last generations, then abandoned like yesterday's newspaper. The contrast between the massive investment and sudden desertion creates an atmosphere that gets under your skin. And the strangest detail? Some of the machinery looks like it could start up tomorrow if someone flipped the right switches. Decades of weather haven't destroyed everything. Parts of Nuttallburg remain frozen in time, waiting for workers who will never return. The protected status means Nuttallburg won't disappear completely like some coal towns, but protection doesn't make it less eerie. If anything, preserving the ruins makes them more haunting. Speaking of haunting, there's another ghost town where the money flowed even faster than Nuttallburg's coal. Here's the crazy thing about Thurman. For a brief shining moment in history, this tiny West Virginia town handled more money than some major New York banks. We're talking about $1 billion flowing through a place where you could literally walk from one end to the other in about 10 minutes. Talk about punching above your weight. The Norfolk and Western Railway made Thurman their headquarters for the entire New River coal region back in the early 1900s. Every single coal car that rolled out of those mountains had to pass through here first. The train depot became the beating heart of America's coal empire, with money changing hands faster than cards at a poker table. Bank transfers, coal contracts, payroll for thousands of miners, it all flowed through Thurman's modest main street like a financial river. But here's where things get interesting. The town wasn't built for normal living. Most of Thurman sits on a narrow strip of land squeezed between the New River and towering cliffs. You couldn't drive there even if you wanted to. The only ways in were by train or across a single railroad bridge. Makes sense, right? The railroad company built it for business, not comfort. At its peak around 1910, Thurman buzzed with activity 24 hours a day. The Glen Hotel served fancy meals to coal executives while trains thundered past every few minutes. Saloons stayed open around the clock because miners worked all shifts. Money flowed so freely that some nights poker games in the back rooms involved more cash than most people saw in a lifetime. Then there's the famous story about Prohibition. While the rest of America went dry in the 1920s, Thurman apparently didn't get the memo. Or maybe they just ignored it. Local legends claim bootleggers used the maze of railroad tracks and river access to keep the good times rolling. The isolation that made Thurman perfect for coal business also made it perfect for avoiding federal agents. Fast forward to today, and you'll find one of the strangest transformations in American history. Around 95 people called Thurman home as of the 2020 census. 95. From handling billions to housing fewer residents than most apartment buildings. The math is almost insulting. Walking through modern Thurman feels like stepping into a movie set after filming Wrapped. The old bank building stands empty, its vault probably echoing with memories of all that coal money. The Glen Hotel? Gone. Most of the businesses that once thrived on railroad wealth? Boarded up or crumbling. You can still see the railroad tracks, but now they carry mostly freight trains that barely slow down as they pass through. The weirdest part is the silence. Visitors consistently mention how unsettling the quiet feels in a place that once never slept. No car traffic because there are still no real roads in. No bustling crowds because there's nothing left to bustle about. just the occasional train whistle echoing off those same cliffs that once trapped all that wealth and activity. What makes Thurman particularly eerie compared to other ghost towns is that it's not completely dead. Those 95 residents are still there, living among the bones of what was once an economic powerhouse. It's like watching a person survive after losing most of their body. Technically alive, but forever changed. The town that once moved mountains of money now moves visitors in a completely different way. They come expecting to find traces of that billion-dollar legacy, but instead discover something much stranger. A place where prosperity simply evaporated, leaving behind questions about what happens when the thing that made your town matter disappears overnight. Speaking of places where prosperity vanished, Thurman's decline looks gentle compared to what happened in Cayford, where the very ground beneath the community became the enemy. Thurman's ghostly silence might unsettle visitors, but wait until you hear about Cayford. This place doesn't just whisper stories of the past. It screams them from every scarred mountainside. Cayford wasn't your typical coal town. Built in the early 1900s, it buzzed with activity as miners carved black gold from the earth beneath their feet. Families packed into company houses, kids ran through dusty streets while their fathers descended into darkness each morning. The town had everything a coal community needed: a company store, a school, even a baseball field where miners would unwind after brutal shifts underground. But here's where Cayford's story takes a darker turn than most ghost towns. When the underground mines finally gave out in the 1970s, you'd think that would be the end of the story. Wrong. The coal companies weren't done with this land yet. They had their eyes on something much bigger and infinitely more destructive. Enter mountaintop removal mining. Forget everything you think you know about coal mining. This wasn't men with pickaxes or even modern underground operations. This was industrial warfare against the landscape itself. Massive machines called drag lines, some as tall as 20-story buildings, began systematically decapitating the mountains around Cayford. They blast off the tops, scrape away everything green and living, then dig down to the coal seams below. The environmental devastation was staggering. Ancient forests that had stood for centuries vanished overnight. Streams got buried under millions of tons of rubble. The very mountains that had defined this landscape for millennia became unrecognizable. Larry Gibson, one of Cayford's last residents, used to take visitors up to what remained of his family's mountain. He'd point to where streams once flowed, where forests once grew, where his ancestors were buried. All gone. And the people? Well, that's the truly haunting part. Most families had already left when the underground mines closed, but those who stayed, like Gibson's family, who had lived on Cayford Mountain for over 200 years, found themselves surrounded by an apocalyptic wasteland. The air filled with coal dust. The water turned dangerous. The silence became deafening once the machines finally moved on. Today, fewer than 20 people call Cayford home. That's not a typo. 20 people in a place that once housed hundreds. The remaining houses sit like islands in an ocean of industrial destruction. Some folks drive through and wonder how anyone could live in such a place. But for the holdouts, leaving would mean abandoning everything their families built over generations. The strangest part? Nature is trying to come back. Scrubby vegetation creeps across the flattened mountaintops, but it's not the same forest that stood here before. It's something alien, something that doesn't quite belong. Visitors often describe feeling disoriented walking across these artificial plateaus where mountains used to rise. Your brain expects to see peaks and valleys, trees and streams. Instead, you get geometric flatness punctuated by enormous pits filled with toxic water. Larry Gibson used to say that Cayford wasn't just a ghost town, it was a graveyard, not just of coal and community, but of an entire way of life that had existed in harmony with these mountains for thousands of years. He fought until his death in 2012 to preserve what little remained of his ancestral home. The coal companies have mostly moved on now, chasing easier profits elsewhere. But Cayford remains a testament to what happens when industry decides a landscape is worth more dead than alive. It's a different kind of abandonment than the other ghost towns we've explored. Speaking of different kinds of abandonment, there's another place where the mountains themselves didn't just die, they became killers. Water has this funny way of revealing secrets nobody once found. In Jewel Valley, Virginia, those secrets turned deadly fast. Built in the 1930s specifically for coal workers, this wasn't some random settlement that grew organically over decades. The coal company planned every street, every house, every building from scratch. They needed workers close to the mines, and Jewel Valley seemed perfect for the job. The town hummed with activity for about 15 years. Families moved in, kids played in the streets, and the local church became the heart of community life. Makes sense, right? Coal was booming, jobs were steady, and people felt secure enough to build real lives there. But mountain communities like this one lived on borrowed time, even when nobody knew it yet. Then came 1947. The mine accident that changed everything wasn't just another industrial mishap you'd read about in newspapers and forget. Dozens of workers died when part of the mine collapsed during a routine shift. The exact number varies depending on who tells the story, but what doesn't vary is how it shattered the community's faith in their livelihood. Families lost fathers, brothers, sons. The town that once buzzed with optimism suddenly felt cursed. And the weird part is, that was just the beginning of Jewel Valley's problems. Water contamination started showing up in wells across town sometime in the late 1940s. Nobody could drink from their taps without getting sick. The coal company claimed it wasn't their fault, pointing fingers at natural mineral deposits in the ground. Local residents knew better. They lived there long enough to remember when the water tasted fine. Well, you can't run a community when people can't drink the water safely. Families started packing up and leaving one by one, then in groups. The company store closed first, then the school. By the mid-1950s, Jewel Valley was practically empty. The few stubborn holdouts eventually gave up when it became clear nobody was coming to fix the water problem or reopen the mines. What's left now tells a story most people would rather forget. Abandoned houses sit scattered across the valley, their roofs caved in and walls slowly crumbling back into the earth. The old church still stands, though its windows are long gone and weeds grow through cracks in the foundation. Rusted car parts and mining equipment dot the landscape like metal tombstones marking where a community used to thrive. Then there are those stories about people getting lost while exploring the old mines. Local search and rescue teams know the area well enough, but they'll tell you straight up that some parts of those tunnels are just too dangerous to enter. Cave-ins happen without warning. Gas pockets can knock you unconscious before you realize what's happening. The smart money says stay away from underground exploration entirely. But people keep showing up anyway. Urban explorers, photographers, history buffs who think they know what they're doing. Most come back with interesting pictures and stories about finding old mining equipment or personal belongings left behind when families fled. Some don't come back at all. Whether that's because they got lost, injured, or worse is anybody's guess. The water that poisoned Jewel Valley still runs through the area today. Environmental cleanup efforts have helped, but locals remain skeptical about drinking anything that comes from those particular mountains. Trust, once broken by corporate negligence and community tragedy, doesn't heal easily in places like this. Speaking of places where trust gets shattered, there's another town that straddles two states and has seen more than its fair share of disasters. Sometimes location makes everything worse when things go wrong. Jellicoe sits right on the Tennessee-Kentucky border like a town that couldn't make up its mind about which state to call home. Well, turns out it didn't need to choose. Both sides claimed it when coal money was flowing. The railroad carved through these mountains in the 1880s, and suddenly the Sleepy Valley became a bustling crossroads where fortunes were made and lost faster than you could say black gold. The town's location made it perfect for shipping coal north and south. Trains rolled through day and night, their whistles echoing off the mountain walls. By the 1920s, Jellicoe had grown into a proper boomtown with hotels, theaters, and enough saloons to keep the miners happy after long shifts underground. The population swelled to over 3,000 people, all riding the coal wave that seemed like it would never crash. But here's where Jellicoe's story gets darker than most. This wasn't just another mining town that quietly faded away when the coal ran out. Explosions rocked the mines with disturbing frequency. The 1902 disaster at Fratterville Mine killed 216 men in a single blast, one of the deadliest mining accidents in American history. Then there was the 1911 explosion that claimed dozens more lives. Makes sense that people started whispering about cursed ground, right? Local newspapers from the era read like horror stories. Headlines screamed about cave-ins, gas explosions, and bodies that were never recovered. The mines beneath Jellicoe became a maze of tunnels. Some sealed after accidents, others simply abandoned when they became too dangerous to work. And the weird part is, many of these passages still exist today, creating an underground labyrinth that spans both states. Then, there's the surface destruction that followed. When strip mining arrived in the 1960s, entire mountainsides disappeared. The picturesque valley that once housed thriving neighborhoods became a moonscape of exposed rock and acid runoff. Families who had lived there for generations found their wells poisoned and their homes worthless overnight. Most packed up and left, but their empty houses remained, slowly surrendering to kudzu vines and weather. Let's not forget the bizarre stories that emerged as Jellicoe emptied out. Photographers who ventured into the abandoned sections in the 1980s captured images of collapsed hotels with grand facades still intact, their lobbies filled with debris and wild growth. One famous shot shows a perfectly preserved barber chair sitting in a shop where the roof had caved in decades earlier. Nature was reclaiming everything, but selectively, leaving behind these haunting reminders of better times. Local old-timers tell stranger tales about nighttime changes in the town. They claim certain streets look different after dark, with buildings appearing that shouldn't be there anymore. Some say you can hear the old train whistles on quiet nights, even though the last passenger service stopped running in 1979. Whether you believe these stories or not, there's something unsettling about a place where state lines blur and the past refuses to stay buried. The few remaining residents, maybe 300 people split between both sides of the border, have learned to live with their town's reputation. They'll warn visitors about unstable mine entrances and crumbling structures, but they also share the folklore with a mix of pride and genuine concern. Because here's what makes Jellicoe different from other ghost towns. People still live there, watching over the ruins and keeping the stories alive. And those stories have a way of drawing people in. Just like the old-timers say, urban explorers, ghost hunters, and history buffs regularly make pilgrimages to walk through Jellicoe's eerie remains. But some of these visitors discover that exploring abandoned mining towns carries risks that go far beyond unstable buildings and hidden shafts. Most of these Appalachian ghost towns share one terrifying truth. People go in, but they don't come out. Well, at least not all of them do. The geography alone makes these places death traps. These mining towns weren't built for easy access. They were built where the coal was. Deep valleys, steep ridges, and forests so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead. Roads? What roads? Many of these settlements relied on narrow-gauge railways that haven't seen a train in 70 years. The tracks are gone. Bridges collapsed, and what's left are overgrown paths that lead nowhere fast. Take Kaymore's famous 1,300 steps. Sounds like a fun hiking challenge until you realize those steps are crumbling concrete and rusted metal. One wrong move and you're tumbling down a mountainside. But here's the weird part. Even experienced hikers with GPS units get turned around. The forest canopy blocks satellite signals, and every hollow looks exactly the same. Then, there are the mines themselves. Thousands of abandoned shafts honeycomb these mountains like Swiss cheese. Some are obvious, big black holes with warning signs. Others hide under decades of leaf litter and fallen branches. Step on the wrong spot, and you're dropping 50 feet into flooded darkness. Rescue crews call these areas vertical coffins, for good reason. Local emergency responders will tell you straight up they don't go into certain areas after dark. Makes sense, right? Equipment fails, radio signals die, and the terrain that's tricky in daylight becomes absolutely murderous when you can't see your own feet. The buildings themselves are another problem entirely. These structures weren't built to last a century. Coal company housing was cheap, fast construction designed for 20-year lifespans. Now they're rotting death traps held up by nothing but stubbornness and maybe a few termites. Floors collapse without warning, walls lean at impossible angles, and don't even think about trusting those staircases. But the locals will give you different reasons why people vanish. Every town has its stories, passed down through generations, like family recipes. Nuttallburg residents swear the place is cursed because workers died in cave-ins that were covered up. Thurmond old-timers whisper about seeing lights in empty buildings, lights that move from room to room in patterns that make no sense. The strangest tales come from Jewel Valley, where that mine disaster in the 1940s killed dozens. Families claim their relatives never came home, not just from the accident, but from searching for answers afterward. 3 different search parties went missing over the years. Found their cars, found their equipment, never found them. Well, here's what really happens to most missing people in these places. The wilderness doesn't mess around. Weather changes fast in mountain valleys. A sunny afternoon becomes a thunderstorm, then fog so thick you can't see your hand. Hypothermia kills in temperatures that would surprise you. 50 degrees and wet clothes will do the job. Water's another killer. Old mining operations left behind flooded pits, contaminated streams, and underground rivers that flow where they shouldn't. Drink from the wrong source and you're dealing with heavy metal poisoning. Fall into certain pools and the chemicals will burn your skin. The forest itself fights back against intruders. Poison ivy grows thick as carpet. Black bears don't appreciate surprise visitors. Copperheads hide under every log and rock pile. Mother Nature spent 70 years reclaiming these towns, and she doesn't give up territory easily. Search and rescue teams have their own theories about why recovery efforts fail so often. Dense canopy hides everything from above. Scent trails disappear in rocky terrain. Radio dead zones stretch for miles. Even trained professionals with proper equipment struggle in these conditions. Yet, despite all the dangers, all the warnings, all the missing person reports, people keep going. Something about these ghost towns calls to explorers, photographers, and thrill seekers. They arrive confident, well-prepared, and absolutely certain they'll be different from everyone who came before. Most are wrong.